It's time to let go. Release the burdens brought on by life when you simply want to be free. You're a blinding beam of light, and you deserve to be free. You're always welcome here. It's time to be quite honest.
Good afternoon. I'm Sarah Bush, and today we're going to do something unique in this podcast. We're speaking in a common language that has to do with special women doing special things. So I'm welcoming the Women's American History Club along with all the others that are listening to this podcast. But we're going to do it in a different way. We're going to do a digital resurrection of Grace Hopper. So give me just a second to see if we can bring her in with a voice saying, Grace, Grace, are you out there? Oh, I think she's coming in. Hello. Thank
Hello.
you. Hello. How are
Hello.
you today?
I'm good. I'm very good.
Good.
It's unusual to be back here, but I'm doing okay.
Well, I think that the gift in you coming back today is more important to the people that don't know your gifts to the world and how it's now showing up in even a grander way. But to know all the things that you actually did in history that unfortunately we don't learn about in the history books unless we dig in and find qualified people like your life coach to bring you to life. So I want to say, welcome, Grace Hopper. And I want you to know that in the conversation that we're having around the gifts, I want you to tell your story not as someone that is truly wanting to tout themselves, because there's nothing in your history that tells me you ever did that. You were a much more graceful woman in your efforts to change the world. So, to the audience, give us some history about who this incredible woman is called Grace Hopper.
Well, when you talk about changing the world, I didn't really know that I was going to have that kind of influence. I think my parents were surprised and did not think about that when I was taking everything in the house apart and putting it back together again. I had done every clock in the house and the clocks next door and all the clocks and put them back together. And my mother was quite puzzled and tried to limit me to just one. But, I did them all. But she had no clue that that would catapult me into mathematics and engineering and take me to the places that I was able to go. I was born in 1906. Now, that was a long time before Oklahoma was even a state. I was born in New York City, and I went to do all my schooling there, and then I went to Vassar. And at Vassar, there weren't very many women there, and most of the women there were just thinking about getting married, and maybe they were going to teach mathematics in elementary school. I had no interest in teaching. That was the furthest thing from my mind. I actually wanted to be an actuary. But I did tutor in math and physics, and I was good at it, but I just didn't want that day-to-day grind with those children. It was just not what I had in my mind for my future. I did graduate in 1928, and I did graduate with honors in physics and math. So that was taking me where I thought I should go, but I didn't know exactly where that was.
But
Yeah.
To interrupt, I have to say, Grace, that during the time that you graduated, because you graduated with honors in physics and math, this wasn't a time for women to really stand out. This was a
No.
male dominant world, especially in the math and sciences that you were in.
Yes, I did a lot to try to blend in by wearing as manly clothes and jackets and shirts but I did wear a skirt because that was required and low little heels. But I tried to blend in, and but I just could not be silenced. My voice was still very strong in terms of what I could see that was going to happen in the future, that we could maybe do pretty quickly. And if we didn't, it might take another 300 years to get to where I thought we could go in a little faster pace.
Okay.
I went on to graduate school, in master's and PhD at Yale.
Right.
And, I studied everything there because I was interested. I did philosophy and bacteriology and zoology. And I just loved anything that had symbols. And I was looking for everything and anything that had symbols and how they worked together and how I could use those symbols to make language.
So, in addition to that, you also studied languages. So, the languages,
Yes.
the courses that you took, even in astronomy and geology and architecture, I just think that that's incredible that every one of those elements, as I have studied your history, have to do with communication.
Yes.
And communication is all about symbols.
Yes, all about symbols and numbers, and
Yes.
making symbols and numbers into things that could be words, so they could talk. And one of the things that I'm noteworthy for is creating the compiler, and the compiler was that thing that allowed all of the different entities to talk to each other. Now, I might go back and say that my first job was working with Mark I and then the Mark II. And I am going to tell you that when I first saw that Mark I was scared to death. It was like 14 feet long, 8 feet high, 7 feet deep. It was pretty big. And of course, in one of my speeches later in life, I told people that I thought probably in their lifetime they would see a computer that wasn't as big as that was smaller and could fit into offices and homes, and that everyone would have them. But
Okay, so
that wasn't the case back in my day. We just had the big main frames.
So I want to go back before that because I think that there's some interesting parts here that we're leaving out. One of which is that you had been married and you got divorced. And then there comes a whole period of time when you were a wave. And I think that those are both elements that are important to understand kind of how you've been coming up through the ranks. Can you talk on that?
Yes. I got married, and the man was at Vassar and then was a professor at New York University and was a nice fellow. But after about 9 years, quite frankly, he wasn't as smart as I was. And it just got a little boring. And I had no interest in having children because I knew that would totally interrupt the future that I wanted to create for myself and for the world. So it became, why am I married if I'm not having children? And it just became kind of a, just kind of a wart. And so I just got out of that, and I was better off for it, I think. I don't think all women have to be married and have children. It's nice for some people, and some women are cut out for it, but not me.
But the ironic part is, at the time that you did that in 41, or I guess 1945, that wasn't normal. Women didn't divorce.
Oh, I know many people, looked at me like I was a big failure. I couldn't make it work. And it was the big DISGRACE, disgrace,
Right.
to get divorced. But I just had to do it.
But that was on the heels of World War II. Is that right?
Yes.
Is that how you came into being a wave?
Yes, that World War II really changed my life and my career path. I was certainly a patriot, and I wanted to help. I wanted to join the Navy, but because I was a woman, they said no. So I joined the WAVES. Now that stood for Women for Voluntary Emergency Service.
Right.
And that was in 1942 when I was, and the Navy rejected me because they said I didn't weigh enough. They said I was too small, too little, just couldn't be in the Navy. But wasn't long after that the Navy was glad to have me in 1943 as a commissioned officer, Lieutenant Junior JG. And that started my career with the Navy. And
yeah, for 42
also my
years.
relationship with computers.
Yeah, but that was a 42-year career with the Navy. Yeah.
Yes.
So
I went on to be admiral and everything. I went on to be a rear admiral, and that was quite a honor at the time and always, and certainly because I was a woman, and I think I was I have to tell you, I can't remember things like I used to, so sometimes I need a little help, or we just kind of have to skip over, but
that's okay. So let's shift gears for a minute, because I want to talk about the COBOL.
Okay.
And for people that don't know what the COBOL stands for, it's Common Business Oriented Language. And so how did you get the COBOL off the ground?
Well, as I mentioned before, I went to work on the Mark I and the Mark II. And the Mark II started having a lot of problems. And one of the problems that we had is that we found a little something in the mainframe that didn't need to be there. And I, being a woman, had tweezers. So we got in there with the tweezers, and we took out the moth, little bitty moth. And so it was able to work again. But that moth, I kept it in my logbook. And later on, they took that logbook and that little moth and put him in the American History Museum, I believe it was, where they put that little guy.
And it was because of what you claimed when they found the bug. And that was
yeah,
the
I
term
know where you're
debugging.
going.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a bug, and I said, we need to debug the system, and I started talking about debugging, and that's where the word kind of caught on.
I love that. That is just so wonderful.
And I'm remembering now, it wasn't the American History Museum, it was the National History Museum that has that logbook and that little moth taped with Scotch tape to one of the pages.
That's incredible. For you to even put that in that book, much less be classified as the person that debugged the computer.
Right. And then after that, I started working on the UNIVAC, which was the first commercial large-scale electronic computer. And it was there that I got the compiler, and I got that idea and made that, which allowed the computer to tell the computer to manufacture its own program. And the computer started to, by my work, to recognize English commands into the machine code.
Because before that, it was numeric.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have
But
to tell
from
you
there,
that,
I formulated COBOL.
right.
And many of you may remember when you had home mortgages, the banks would send you a little, about a third of a piece of typing paper, and it would have all these little holes in it. And you would send that back with your payment, and they were able to credit it to your account. That was COBOL.
Well, we're going to
And
it
it was
picture
huge
of that
at the time.
Yeah, we'll have a picture on that here in the podcast as well. But there are a couple of things I want to share. One, during this time that you were doing all of this, you were a major threat. Everything I read about what you did, you were a major threat to the ego of the men that thought they had this under control. This is also where you created the Flowmatic, or the English language based computer. And while talking to my brother, who used to be with IBM, he talked about the complexity of the COBOL and how that worked within IBM. But more importantly, I called my ex-husband because I knew the term COBOL. When I started doing my research, I kept going, that's got to be where I've heard this. So I called him and I said, help me understand where I know this name. And he said, Sarah, he said, I worked with it with the Comptroller's Office, the Water Development Board here in Austin, the Health Department, and the criminal justice system. And the gift in all of that was, he said that when Y2K came along, he had already given to the computer the capability of going beyond 2000. So the criminal justice system here in Texas was never affected by the computers shutting down because they didn't go past 2000. So he himself saw what was going to happen digitally to COBOL if it wasn't corrected. But I also found that elementary kids are also learning the basic coding skills in school, which I think, you have to pay attention to where you started and where it is now. That's how powerful.
I mean, a lot of people want to know if COBOL's dead.
No.
And the answer is no, because about 44% of the banks are still using COBOL.
That's exactly right.
If you bank at Citibank or American Express or Wells Fargo, you're a part of that COBOL system. John Deere's on COBOL, the Air Force is on COBOL, the Department of Defense is on COBOL. And COBOL is alive and well, except for one problem. And that problem is that all the people who know COBOL are either dead and gone like me, or they're in their 80s, a few in their 40s or 50s. So what is going to happen is people are going to have to study COBOL in school, just like you said, and they're going to have to get degrees in it in order to maintain and move forward with COBOL. So the only way COBOL can be dead is if all the people that know how to do it are dead and nobody else learns how to do it to follow them. So it's a big problem. Companies that have COBOL are looking for employees, and of course this is a job opportunity for people. I think that they will have a secure job and they'll make more money because they know a language that not a lot of people know at this time that are, under 50 or 60.
Well, that's one of the things that Bob, my ex-husband, said is that they're looking for COBOL technicians because they ran everybody off thinking that all this new computer system and everything else they didn't need them anymore. And
You're
now they're
right.
finding they have to have them in order to make, one, a better understanding of how the machine works, but more importantly, to be able to tell it to do the things that it needs it to do. So,
Right.
see what you created?
I know. And in 1966, I believe it was, I retired from the Navy, but they called me back because they needed me to standardize COBOL for the Navy. So I went back even after I was retired.
Wow.
And I did a lot of speaking during that time, many talks to people about computers and the future. And I even went back to my alma mater, Vassar, and spoke there. And again, I had quite a bit going on at that time. I mean, at one point, I was on the cover of Time magazine. And also, I went on that little TV show I called the Johnny Carson Show. And that was a lot of fun. He's totally
Johnny Carson or David
flabbergasted by
Letterman?
me. Oh, David Letterman. You are right. It's David Letterman.
Yeah. Kind of the same
I get
thing.
mixed up, but I know those boys were all like celebrities and big time to be on there with all the people who are acting and famous and rich, but I was on there too.
Well, you should have been. You have changed the way that the computer system and the communication system of the computers have truly changed the world. So tell me about the award that you got in 1969. The computer.
You're going to like this. I got the Computer Science Man of the Year award. I thought that was pretty interesting. And around that same time period, I got to be a distinguished fellow at the British Computer Society, which was quite an honor. And, but by, 1983, I was promoted to be Rear Admiral. And that really catapulted me into being kind of a celebrity at the time, which was kind of funny to me because, I'm not pretty or cute or rich or any of those things, but I did go to the White House. President Reagan had me to the White House, and you know what I said to him?
Tell me.
I said, I'm older than you are. Yeah.
That's really cute.
There's just so many awards and accomplishments. It's just embarrassing to talk about because there were just so many, but I was grateful for them. And, later in life, what's kind of funny is that I was interviewed and they asked me what my greatest accomplishment in life was. And I thought about saying it was the compiler because that was a big one. But in reality, I said, it's teaching. Now, remember when I said I didn't want to teach school? But I can just see those faces and feel the experience of those young people that I trained and see what they were doing. And I gave them my full attention when I was working with them. I wanted to be a role model for those young, eager minds, especially the women. And you know what they called me?
Tell me.
The science hero. I thought that was kind of cute.
That is very cute. But I think it's interesting, Grace, that Here, years and years ago, you said, I didn't want to teach. And
Yeah,
yet, in reality, you taught every day. You worked on the computers. You taught every
that
day with the Navy.
you are
And
right.
and so it's all about effective communication. It just may look different not standing in front of a classroom. But, I think that the blessing that you were gifted with in this life is truly that you were a teacher. You were a teacher of the the world of the unknown that you saw down the road that was going to be so required in the transformative efforts of engineering, of science, in mathematics,
Mathematics.
and in creativity, or even in the building of anything.
Yes.
Um, and
You
so
know,
I,
we're all creative. We're all creative. We're born creative. But
yes,
some people just learn to uh, apply it, and they kind of find their space, their niche, or whatever you might want to call it. Um, I have a quote that many have uh, put in books and things, and the quote is, "A ship in port is safe, but that is not what ships are for.
that's
Sail
exactly,
out to sea and do good things." That's
yeah.
something that I said years ago, and I think it is applicable here.
Well,
And while we're talking about ships, I have
I
to
was
tell
just
you
going to
that,
say,
yeah, they named a destroyer after me. It's
what does
called
that
the
tell you about you?
USS Hopper.
What does that tell you about you? The
Well,
destroyer.
they called it Amazing Grace, like after that little song,
Yeah,
and after me. But it was the second ship ever to be named after a woman.
that's incredible. That is really incredible. And one of the, let's see, 2009, as part of a major reorganization of the Office of Naval Intelligence,
Yes,
one of the four divisions was the Grace Hopper Information Service Center,
that's right.
the other being the John F. Kennedy Irregular Warfare Center, the Nimitz Operational Intelligence Center, and the Farragut Technical Analysis Center. That's incredible, and you're all part of that. But I will tell you that maybe somewhere in history we need to change your 1969 award to Computer Science Woman of the Year.
That would be good. They may be doing it here sometime soon,
Well,
because things are changing, not only in the world of science and mathematics, but across the board in your world and in your culture today.
that's exactly right. So, are you familiar with something that was created in your name, which is the Grace Hopper Celebration? It's this is the 20th anniversary this year, which is the world's largest gathering of women technologists. And it's produced by the Anita B. organization. And this year's celebration, which will be online, will be September of 2020. And it's all because of what you created. And this organization has expanded that to enhance women in the world of technology. So you didn't just create computers, Grace. You didn't just teach students. You planted seeds in the lives of those students that then took it to a greater level, which has now been celebrated after 20 years. So if you
Well,
didn't know that, you need to embrace that honor.
oh, thank you. I have a faint recollection of it, or a recollection of it, but it's nice to hear it and know that. And I'm proud that there's women in that group, and that they're pushing forward for new creative things in the world.
Yeah,
A
absolutely.
lot happened during my lifetime. It happened after I retired. It's still happening in some ways, but basically, I lived out my last years in Arlington, Virginia, and I died in my sleep in 1992 at 85 years old.
You know, thank you, Grace, for coming back to be with us. And I just can't thank you enough for the gifts, not only to the history of what you created, but the ongoing seeds that you planted and the difference that you're making. So, with that, I want to tell you that Grace's life coach is somebody that I think follows in many of the same footsteps, but maybe a little bit more creatively, a little bit different plane, but still being a communicator and speaking common languages is something that her life coach is all about. And so I'd like to introduce you to Arlen Hughes. Hello.
I've got to get my hat off and all that of my glasses so I can now be Erilyn with purple hair. And
You know,
so anyway,
you are,
this was kind of fun to do this, and I've enjoyed it.
well, again, as I said to you in our conversations earlier, there's a lot of commonality commonality between you and Grace, and that is, I think you're both feminist. I think you're both very much passionate about the gifts that you've been given, but more importantly, the changes that you've made. And in looking at your bio, I thought it was interesting that you two are from Oklahoma. I had to giggle at your bio when it said you were from a small town that she always referenced as a peak and a plum town, which meant peek around the corner and you're plumb out of
Well, out of
town.
town.
I just think that's priceless. I'm going to have to remember that one. But, you know, I had to also giggle when it came down to you being a home economic teacher and that you were going to do this, you know, family thing with children and husband and all that. And you were the top Tupperware salesperson, which, you know, made me flashback when I read that, because I thought, oh boy, can I ever remember that? And I'm only 4 years younger than you. So, you know, I really can relate to that era. And obviously, you know, the changes that occurred in your life, the desires that you had, was not necessarily to just be in the world of real estate, which you were in for 40 years, but you really wanted to do something grander, which I think you have done. You were a school teacher, a secondary school teacher, for quite some time, but it didn't necessarily support you financially, but it never supported what I see in your bio as your world dream of seeing all the parts of the world, which, you know, God bless your dad for giving you the whole collection of the World Book of Encyclopedias. Because I have to tell
The
you,
globe and the globe.
and the globe, but I also have to tell you that I think that we're missing not giving that to our children nowadays, because it has a different kind of history. It has the root history of life. And so, you know, if you were able to research different parts of the country you wanted to travel to out of the encyclopedia and go, then you added so much more of the story as you came back to live your life.
Kind of funny, when I started traveling, and I said I'm going to go around the world, and they went, "Oh, isn't that cute? She thinks she's going to go around the world." But I got to heading in that direction around the world, and my dad said, "You know, you have these encyclopedias in this globe, so you can get a lot of information. You don't have to go."
But the
But of
gift
course,
is
I had to
experiencing it.
go.
Yeah, I
Because
get it.
I want the interpersonal relationship more than just the books and the visual of the planet. I wanted the personal contact with the people.
It's the cultural differences. It's the lifestyle. I've traveled a lot of places around the world as well. And, you know, I come back and, you know, at different times I've shared stories with my son with different pictures. And I just said, you have to get down on their level to understand their culture and really appreciate their culture. My mom always used to say, you know, whatever way of life is, you need to flow with that in order to really understand it. Well, there were a couple of times I did flow with it. I'm glad nobody else knew I was over there. But, the gift is, you're accepted in all these countries and they're as interested in you as you are of them. But that's part of the education. That's part of the gift that we give when we come back and share it with those that want those little seeds that have been planted. And some of these people will never go outside the United States, much less outside of their own little community. So I'm going to shift gears for a minute and ask you to tell me about your art business, the Two-Legged Fiesta. What is that?
Well, in 2008, we had a downturn in the economy. And in real estate, I'd been through a few. So my thing was, instead of killing yourself trying to make the same amount of money, just live on your savings a while and do some of the things you've been wanting to get done. Kind of like, a lockdown for myself, but the lockdown was going out. I said, from this point on in my life, and I was in my 60s, there is nothing that I'm going to do that is not creative, that doesn't educate me, feed me in some way so I can be of service to other people and be of service to myself to make growth and different ways of doing things, thinking out of, thinking out of the box, for instance. And I met a woman who needed one more person in her art class to make the class at Laguna Gloria. And I said, well, I'll help you out. I'll do it, but I'm terrible. I can't draw. And she said, you don't have to draw to paint. And it was like, really? So I started painting. And at the end of that class, she said, you need to keep painting. So I had a big show with 100 pieces of art, and I sold 17 pieces. And then it just kind of catapulted from there. I began to write. I, put together a book of women's stories, women from the 60s, now in their 60s, who chose not to have children because we were the first generation of women who had that choice. So I put together that book. And then I did stage shows in Austin, also in Canada and Mexico and New York City, and kind of did my storytelling about what my life had been like and my perspective of how things had changed from being a wife, homemaker, and mother, the best there was ever going to be, with a degree in home economics, how much better can it get, to a whole different way of doing things. And so just everything I do has a creative bent. My house was on the Keep Austin Weird tour. I have an art car. It's the car's decorated with bananas on it and all kinds of things. So that's just kind of where I went, and it's been fun for me, and that's what I'm going to continue to do till I can't do it anymore.
Well, so you also have written, let's see. Yeah, you were featured in a documentary film named Love in the 60s, which is what you were just talking about.
Right.
And that's in the local library in Austin as well as Amazon.
Yes. Yes, on the Amazon streaming.
Okay.
The book is on Amazon, Kid Me Not, Stories of Women from the 60s now in their 60s. And then the film is also on Prime Video.
Okay, great. And the other thing that I think was very interesting is that CBS Morning News called you the Queen of Weird in Austin. And so what were they interviewing you for that they gave you that great title?
Well, I had kind of a unusual artistic house with lots of things out in the yard at the corner of Enfield and Mopac Access Road. And I started having some issues with my knees, and I lived in a 2-story house, so I decided to move. And I moved downtown on North Congress, 2 blocks south of the Capitol, in one of those old buildings. And I had a pet pig and an art car And so I moved downtown with the pig and the art car. But evidently, the news stations had a lot of calls wondering what's happened with that house. The person's gone. The pig's not in the backyard. My kids are crying. All that kind of stuff. And so they did a little feature thing. And in the local CBS News, and call me the Queen of Weird, but Bill Geist with CBS Sunday Morning News came and did a story of which I was included with the car and the pig and the house. And we had done a show at Zach Scott, an original show called Keeping It Weird. And I was the only person in the show that was a character that played myself.
Oh, how wonderful.
And we actually had the art car drive on stage at the Zach Scott Theater. It was quite a production.
Well, while doing my own investigation on you, Miss Hughes,
Oh,
I
dear.
also got to see the video having to do with what you do with millennials, which I will tell you, that was very, very creative, very informative. And, you need to continue doing more of that, because I think that those are the kinds of conversations that aren't happening. And we need to share that wisdom that we're given as we get older. I think that once you turn 60, you have a certain right to say, I have earned my keep and I can say what I want. And you do say it very creatively, but more importantly, I think that you say it to the level that they really can grasp what you're talking about, but more importantly, take some responsibility in what you left as a message. And I hope that you will continue doing that, because I think that you're still a teacher, no different than Grace. You are, I think that the gift of being a queen of weird in Austin sets you different from everybody else, because you're not afraid to be who you are. You're very transparent. You're very artistic. You remind me in some ways of my mother being as artistic. But at the same time, you're unique. And I think that when you and I got to talking about doing Grace, and me taking a look at her bio and taking a look at your bio and realizing that the gifts that you bring as women, it doesn't have to be that you get the naval accommodations and the certifications from Washington, but you are out there, you are doing something that says, be who you are, be creative, create history as you live, but share that with those that don't know that history. And I think that's what's happened, and it's sad, but I think that's what's happened to so many people that have died and their story has never been told. That's the encyclopedia of history.
And that's the history we missed.
Yes.
Because they somehow, for whatever reason, didn't tell it, or it wasn't available, or it got destroyed, or any number of things. So
That's exactly
yes,
right.
I think it's important to live the legacy. I think in my generation that I've seen more change than any other generation in history. I mean, remember, I had a party line telephone.
Yep.
And then we thought it was a miracle that I had a telephone in my car when I was a realtor. And now we have these devices that we use morning, noon, and night. And it's, I've seen a lot of change in the culture, a lot of change in how we live and how we are. And I think millennials look to women in our generation for guidance, because we are women that came up in a different way. We are not their mothers.
Right.
And also when we were talking about wisdom, because we do have a lot of wisdom from our experiences being around for a while, is that I have coined this term, the wisdom generation, and that's what I reference myself as, or being a part of now, the wisdom generation. And it seems kind of like a simple term, but I started using it, and people said, "Where did you get that? I've never heard that." And
I think that's a great term.
so we researched it, and then they wrote an article on me as coining the wisdom generation term. So You just never know. If you're just out there and you're kind of being a part of everything, things just happen. I have very rarely just set a goal and said, I'm going there, and I'm not stopping and looking in either direction. I'm going there. I just kind of say, well, there's something. I think I'll do that until I don't do that anymore, and until I go a different direction.
Well,
So,
that's how we create history.
yes,
But that's also how you create art. Your art teacher said you don't need to know how to draw to paint.
to paint.
You don't have to have all the tools to be Grace. You don't have to have all the tools to be you. You just have to utilize what you do have and develop it.
And one of the things I talk to younger women about, I do some life coaching with them, but sometimes I'm just talking to them. And I just say you have to remain curious about everything. And that's what Grace Hopper did.
Yes.
She was curious about everything, even other than science and mathematics. And that's where all the rich stuff comes from, is just having, as my mother used to say, that Erilyn's got a finger in every pie. You ever heard that term?
Yes, I have.
So I think that's important. We need to have a finger in every pie, and Grace Hopper certainly did. And it catapulted her into being quite the legend.
Absolutely. Well, I can't thank you enough for coming and having a conversation, not only about Grace, but about your gifts as well. I do believe that the title, Speaking a Common Language, is exactly what we've just done. It doesn't have to be the early 1900s. It can be taking the 1900s and coming forth, realizing there's so much relationship there that we need to continue expanding. And it's just like the whole COBOL, it's having to expand again. And so they're having to bring people in that know that. So have you got anything else you'd like to share before we wrap this up?
Did everybody get to see the,
We're going to, well, there you go. We're going to show that. It
get
doesn't
it?
show up on the screen, but there you go. Now it does. But we're going to show that in the podcast itself, along with not only the picture of Grace, but also of you and your car. I think that's something that we need to put in here for color. And also we will list your connections for people to be able to go to your website and learn more about who you are and your gifts. And so I want to say thank you, not only to the women historical group that is watching this, but also all the people that are watching this, is that we want you to know that no different than Erilyn and no different than me, we do want to give messages. We do want to teach. We do want to share history. And we're hoping that we've done even a small portion of that in honoring Grace. So I thank you, Life Coach, for bringing Grace back into the fold.
Thank you.
And I am sure that she is equally as grateful for what you did today. And so with that, I want to share a little bit about information for those women that are watching this as well, because I think it's important to understand where I come from in the efforts of bringing in not only Grace, but also Erilyn to inform. And that is that I have done past podcasts with Dr. Scott Becker and Lisa Tingle, who are both musicians here in Austin, but we did a gastro podcast on the COVID-19 and the importance of just taking care of yourself. We also did one having to do with trapped at home with the Hayes Caldwell Women's Shelter. Again, it's an opportunity for us to realize as a community the difference we can make and the need, especially in the quarantine, to connect with people, to be online, to be on the phone, to connect to your neighbors. I also did one having to do with David Rapella. And if no one knows who that is, they can go on my website or they can go on David's, because this 82-year-old man is as much a gift as you and Grace for the gifts that he's given in his writings and the teachings about love. And then I did one with Angela Smith, which is part of this organization, with the History Women's Organization, having to do with Nikola Tesla. And look at Nikola Tesla, who is now in the efforts of science and the direction of how he changed the course of history. And then last but not least, it was done by my audio engineer, the interview with me and him having to do with my background, but more importantly, my desire to be informed, to inform, and to inspire. So with that, I want to say to all, thank you for being here today. Erilyn, thank you so much for the gifts that you are. I do not want to disconnect from you. I want to definitely be in your little scope of friends. And Grace Hopper, I thank you as well for your gifts. And may we continue to honor all women that make a difference in this world. So thank you. Our time is up. Thank you for yours.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks for everything that you contributed to this.
Well, thank you, dear. You are awesome.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, dear.
You're listening to Quite Honest with Sarah Bush and David Drapella. For more content, videos, and information, visit us on the web at aquietplace.net or go to our YouTube channel and subscribe and ring the bell for notifications. You can also find David Drapella and Sarah Bush on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and visit Sarah at her website, sarahbush.net.